I get emails every day from people saying, you know, they're about to deport my husband, you're my last resort, please help me. And it's this kind of pain is really, it's all over the country. Immigration raid at a factory called Agri-Processors, which is in Postville, Iowa. 389 workers were arrested in one day on May 12th. So by the end of this day, the workforce was, half of the workforce was arrested and about half of the remaining half didn't come to work the next day. Most of these workers were Guatemalans, and many of them didn't even really have a firm command of Spanish. These were people from Quiche and from two communities, one near Antigua, Guatemala, and the documents that the immigrants had acquired, believing that that's what they had to have in order to work at this factory, became evidence that they had committed a felony crime. The immigrants had a choice between taking a plea that would, to a lesser federal charge that would give them, in most cases, 5 months in federal prison, and then summary deportation. Or they could go to trial on a aggravated felony charge that had a mandatory 2-year minimum sentence. A judicial order signed by a federal judge agreeing to deportation without notice of hearing. So at the end of this term they agreed to deportation. You know, this would almost automatically trigger a 10-year bar. But this is, you know, a huge step towards taking what had been a kind of de facto illegal labor system and turning these immigrants into criminals. And so far, no charges have been brought against management. Our challenge as journalists is to understand and write about America's immigration crisis as a systemic failure. We must, of course, write about illegal immigration and its impact on states and communities, but we must also report on the legal immigration system and how critical dysfunction in that system is creating more illegal immigration. And we must write about the huge surge of immigration to this country since 1990 and the ways it is shaping American society regardless of the legal status of the immigrants.
Immigrants as a group commit much less conventional crime than similar native-born Americans. Our immigration quotas are out of sync with our labor needs. You know, it's kind of that simple. It's about the changes in our demography and our economy. Americans are having fewer and fewer babies, our workforce is getting older and older, and the most important thing is that we're getting more and more educated. In 1960, half of all American men dropped out of high school and wanted to do unskilled physical work. Half. Well, today, only less than 10% of American men drop out of high school and want to do unskilled physical work. But we still have a lot of unskilled physical work that needs to get done. In order for the dynamic economy to work, to function as a whole, you need input at all those levels. And the input at the bottom level allows the people at the mid-level and the top level to go on doing what they're doing productively. He already was running the 3 most prosperous restaurants in San Antonio, and he had the land and he had the capital to open the 4th. But he couldn't because the border crackdown was starting to kick in Texas, and he couldn't find workers to work in the kitchen, the busboys. So when he couldn't find the busboys, that meant he couldn't open his restaurant, because you can't run a restaurant without busboys and wait staff. So that meant that first of all, the land sat idle. His capital didn't go into that investment. He lost that investment in San Antonio. Then there was a chef that would have gotten hired in the restaurant, probably native-born. He didn't get a job. Then there were the waiters and the managers in the restaurant who were probably native-born people. They didn't get jobs because he didn't open the restaurant. The architect had that much less work. So a few busboys who would have made the opening of this 4th restaurant possible, for lack of them, up and down the food chain, there was less productive activity. Immigrants, legal and illegal, are less than 10% of the workforce, but they were responsible for half of the economic growth over the past several decades. Economic dynamism draws about 1.5 million foreign workers to the U.S. every year, 1.5 million. But our quotas are set at 1 million. By liberalizing, by having quotas that were actually higher, that would be the best way to get control. Because those quotas would be more realistic. When the economy starts to pick up again, you're going to see people are going to have a hard time growing their business because they're going to have a hard time finding the workers.
Immigration Customs Enforcement was established after the terrorist attacks in 2001. We have now created a compliance enforcement unit. These are the individuals. What we do with this enforcement investigators is that when people come into the United States at a rate of 70,000 a day, we want to know where they're going, who they're seeing, and if they reach that destination. So the compliance enforcement unit, we review the documents on a daily basis of where these individuals are. If they don't show up, we're going to go out and knock on the doors to try to find them. There are certain areas of the country, with a certain industry, where we've got to know who's working there. If they're there illegally, they're going to be removed from that work site. Nuclear power plants, our coal-generating power plants, our electric facilities, our dams. We've got to know who's working at these facilities just to protect our own interior. Since 2001, we are addressing the gang problems. A majority of the gang members, whether it's in New York, Los Angeles, Detroit, El Paso, Texas, a good majority of them come up from El Salvador and come in and try to take over our neighborhoods and influence our young men and young women. So we have a system that once we identify them as criminal aliens, that they've had a criminal arrest or they've been criminally charged, we can go out, we can pick them up, refer them over to detention and removal, and remove them from the United States.
Most recently, September, October of 2007, the City of Windsor, Canadian city, had to deal with the consequence of policy and how policy was being enforced in the U.S. It was a day where I got a call and it said there was a busloads of illegal immigrants that are making their way up from Naples, Florida, and they're going to be coming to your border to claim refugee status. Those individuals that have been in Naples or in Florida for 10 or 15 years, well established from their own perspective, feared of being detained, heard about this, paid this individual $500, got the application filled, packed up their minivans, got on a bus, showed up to the Detroit-Windsor border and claimed refugee status. However, there was a loophole in one of the agreements that we have, and that's the Safe Third Country Agreement. The Safe Third Country Agreement normally allows us to send them back to the U.S. because the U.S. is deemed to be a safe country. However, Mexico and Haiti are not party to that agreement. So all of a sudden, once they declared refugee status in Canada, once they crossed the bridge over into Windsor, then they were entitled to stay in Windsor as refugees until their claims were heard. Once you become a refugee and once you're waiting for your trial or your case to be heard, you're entitled to a number of rights. First and foremost, you're entitled to social services. You're entitled to emergency shelter, and you're entitled to long-term provision of residence, as well as education. The word spread like wildfire. Come on over to Windsor. They give you a check, they provide you housing, you've got school, 18 months before your case is heard. That's the backlog in the Canadian system for a refugee case is heard. People were not told that the likelihood of success of their application 18 months from their first claim was that it would be denied, 97% rated denial. Some of the things that we began to do with our agency, we began to accommodate the men of the Salvation Army. Women were separated and went elsewhere just because of the resource strain. Families were accommodated in hotels. That was one thing that we wanted to ensure. If there are individual males, then we put them in one place. Individual females, we put them in one place. But the families, we did not want to separate. We put the families up in hotels. And I gotta let you know, some individuals crossed the border and the next day were giving birth. So you can imagine the situation they find themselves in. They're going to be there for 18 to 24 months while their case is heard. Their child is going to be 2 years old, a Canadian citizen, and the very likelihood and the result may be that the child will be permitted to stay, where else they're going to have to be sent back. Providing services for new Canadians and for refugees and others requires significant financial investment. Expenditures must be seen as investments. Yes, they are expenditures, but they must be seen as investments. As I talked to you earlier, the benefits certainly outweigh the cost. And we continue to grow our city, continue to grow our community, certainly focusing on immigration. We're very proud of being able to do that because that has certainly created the fabric of diversity in our city, the multiculturalism that we want to certainly continue to espouse as a city of Windsor.